We have covered the work of Claude Farrere in episode 139. Today we will cover his 1911 La Maison des Hommes Vivants, which was released in English in 1923 as The House of the Secret. The novel begins on January 20th, 1909, with a man who is anywhere between 80 and 130 years old, as he himself does not know, and that is because only a month ago he had been 33 years old. Stealing a funerary register, he scribbles down his story with a dull pen on top of a grave, convinced that he has only 2 days to live before he dies of old age. He is or was Captain Andre Narcy, a young charming officer in the army, and not the bag of old bones and loose skin he is now. Stationed at the fortress of Toulon, he receives a letter saying that all the telegraph poles connecting to the Grand Cap have been destroyed by a storm. Just before a massive practice bombardment of the area is planned and must absolutely go ahead. The Vice Admiral de Fiers calls him and tells him to ride up to the Grand Cap by horse to warn them, lest the army blow up whatever occasional charcoal burners and woodcutters might be on site. Narcy rides out, but his horse stumbles and he is forced to put it down and travel in the deep fog and unfamiliar barren wilderness on foot. As he tries to get his bearings, he suddenly sees Madeline, his beloved with whom he had been having an affair for many months. Trying to follow her, he loses her and himself too, falling into the moss. He is found by an old man carrying a lantern, who invites him to rest at their house. This man, the Vicomte d'Antoine, is about 80, yet he introduces Narcy to his father, the Count Francois, who appears just as old as his son. The two old men put him to rest in a secluded room, whose door they bolt behind him, which isn't the sole reason for his disquiet, as he is quite sure he smelled Madeline's perfume and that she is in the next room. Being on his guard, he is brought into the presence later in the night of the Marquis Gaspard, who is the father of the Count and grandfather of the Vicomte, yet is decades younger than either of them. Gaspard tells him Madeline is there because some of her substance is being siphoned from her to help keep the trio alive, as he had been doing to many other volunteers over the majority of his 170 years of life. Gaspard learned the secret from the Count of Saint-Germain, whom he had loved dearly as a master since meeting him at the court of Louis XV, becoming its sole inheritor after Saint-Germain's death. This way he was enabled to steal some of the vigour from many young men and women, which was the reason for why Madeline in the past could not remember where she had been, and the reason for why her body was so unnaturally light. Narcy is told that since he knows their secret, they may never let him go, and will orchestrate for the authorities to consider him dead. Then they might release him in a few years in a distant corner of the world to begin life anew. Narcy refuses, but does bargain for the free never to abuse Madeline again, to which they agree. They also allow him to talk to Madeline one last time before they erase her memory of the event. But the process by which they create a second Narcy, to have him stumble over the cliff and be buried with honours, steals Narcy's youth and leaves him an ancient dotard. This persuades them to free him, and Narcy winds up witnessing his own funeral, while also seeing the inside of his coffin from the eyes of his second corpse, and having Madeline, deep in mourning, not recognize him and throw him a few coins as to a beggar and leave. The last month of his life is spent being huddled over his own grave, as he has no house to return to, writing his story on his own tombstone to warn humanity of the living men, begging his readers to believe him. The novel has a grim, doom-laden atmosphere, and aside from some spiritist jargon, is an enticing read.